Welcome to this explainer. I want you to take a quick look around you right now, in this very instant. You probably feel like time is just slipping right through your fingers, don't you? That the days are dissolving at this frightening speed, and that little by little, you're somehow becoming invisible. For our whole lives, we've been taught to view aging as if it's a prison sentence. We see it as this slow, terrifying descent into irrelevance, where everything bright just fades away, and all you can do is wait for the end in silence. We live absolutely terrified of that moment. We try to outrun our own shadow, hoarding things, collecting people, and stockpiling memories as if we could build some useless barricade against time.
But hold on a second. Stop and think about this. What if we've been looking at this entire picture completely upside down? What if growing older isn't about losing anything at all, but is actually about gaining everything? Today, I'm going to show you that old age is definitely not a prison. In fact, it is the master key to escaping the cage you've been locked inside since your 20s.
So, let's dive into Section 1, the cage of youth, or the exhaustion of being someone. Think back to how you lived when you were younger. Do you remember the sheer noise of it all? That relentless mental static in your head that literally never gave you a moment of peace? You were always running towards something, or frantically running away from something else. Always trying to prove you were someone. You lived trapped in perpetual anxiety, constantly worried about what everyone else thought of you, measuring your worth against these invisible shifting standards. There was this brutal, frantic urgency every single day to prove you were worthy. And because of that silent terror, the fear that if you stopped moving, you'd discover you were nobody, you just kept adding layers. You became the provider, the mother or father, the boss, the employee, the friend, the model citizen. You wore all these roles like heavy coats in the absolute middle of summer. You were sweating, burdened, honestly believing that if you just put on enough of them, you'd finally feel safe and complete. But it never quite worked, did it? You just kept running, totally exhausted, wondering when you'd finally get permission to just rest.
Which brings us right to Section 2, the great shedding, when those masks finally fall away.
Here's a secret no one really tells you. Aging is actually your permission to stop performing. And I don't mean the rest of death here. I mean the rest of being fully alive, but finally done with the illusion. As you get older, something fascinating happens. It's a very real biological and psychological phenomenon. Those heavy layers you spent decades frantically building, they just naturally start to fall away. Not because you're failing and not because you're in decline, but because you simply don't have the energy to sustain the act anymore. And honestly, you no longer have the interest. This completely flips our usual narrative. You retire, and suddenly you aren't your job title anymore. Your kids grow up and move out, and you're no longer the round-the-clock protector. Now, if you desperately try to hold on to control, sure, this feels like an absolute tragedy. It feels like you're vanishing. But look at what happens when you shift your perspective just a little bit. What if all those roles were really just masks, heavy disguises that you can now finally take off? You're not disappearing. For the very first time, you are actually appearing.
Now, this isn't just some comforting, feel-good thought. It's deeply rooted in psychology. The famous psychologist Carl Jung called this exact movement individuation. It's this profound psychological process where your true self basically stops fragmenting itself into a million tiny pieces just to win external approval, and instead it finally integrates into wholeness. So dropping the performance for others isn't a loss of your identity at all. It's the ultimate journey of discovering who you truly are.
All right, let's look at Section 3, Solitude versus Loneliness, the silent adversary in the night.
This brings us to the deepest fear, doesn't it? Society has relentlessly drilled into our heads that getting older automatically equals isolation, that you'll just be forgotten in some dark corner. And yes, it's true that as you age, the loud, demanding social world quiets down a lot. But we absolutely have to draw a sharp line between two vastly different states of being here. On one side, we have painful loneliness. This is a form of gnawing hunger. It's like reaching your hand out in the dark and finding absolutely nothing there, or standing outside of life looking in through a fogged-up glass. But on the flip side, we have fertile solitude. This is inner sufficiency. It's the raw, beautiful discovery that you are already whole. You don't need anyone to validate you, or observe you, or confirm you exist just to make you feel real. When you're constantly with others, it's this exhausting dance of fulfilling mutual needs. But in fertile solitude, that whole exhausting mechanism finally comes to a rest. You can simply exist, no audience required.
So the crucial takeaway here is how this solitude frees us from what we can call the imaginary audience.
When we're young, so much of our life is basically a performance for an invisible crowd. You live by this exhausting four-step timeline. First, you experience something delightful. Second, you instantly capture it with a silent camera in your mind. Third, you immediately think about how to share it and shape it into a narrative for others. And fourth, you wait around for someone to validate it and tell you it was beautiful. Even your most private, quiet pleasures carry this faint echo of wishing someone else knew about them. It totally keeps you from ever being fully present in your own life.
But as you age, that imaginary audience, they pack up and leave. The silent camera disappears. You finally release the need for every single experience to be validated or turned into something impressive. And in that release, life becomes astonishingly immediate. You can pour a cup of coffee and literally just drink it. You taste the coffee, you feel the warmth of the mug in your hands, you watch the steam rise. That's the complete experience right there, and it is entirely enough. The taste of fresh bread, the touch of the wind on your face, these moments don't need to be part of some grand narrative of success anymore. They are just unfolding, and you get to simply be present within them.
Moving to Section 4, letting go of expectations, which is really a quiet violence against reality.
To get to that state of absolute freedom, there's one final major barrier we have to dissolve: expectations. It's a tricky psychological trap that binds you to so much unnecessary suffering, and it's super subtle because it usually disguises itself as virtue or morality. But really, it's just a quiet form of violence against reality. Let's walk through this trap of the word should. Look at the left side here. These are the invisible burdens we carry around. We project things like, my kids should call more often, or my body should function exactly like it did 20 years ago, or my life should be completely resolved by now. But now look at the right side, the actual reality. If you're sitting with your grandchild, but part of your brain is whispering that they should visit more, the actual, real moment happening right in front of you gets tainted by bitter resentment. You end up mourning what doesn't exist instead of actually living what does. Expectations aren't reflections of the real world. They're just projections of your own ego.
And here is where aging offers us a truly tremendous gift. It's something we can call lucid exhaustion. Think about it. You've been disappointed enough times in life to finally recognize the pattern. Life is going to move to its own indifferent rhythm, not according to your demands. And gradually, just through sheer fatigue, you begin to let go of your expectations. Not because you've mastered some heroic, monk-like discipline, but because you are simply too tired to keep arguing with reality. In that quiet surrender of control, this incredibly deep, grounded peace starts to emerge. You stop insisting that life obey your rules, and suddenly, all your inner conflict just dissolves.
Which leads us to Section 5, embracing the silent witness and realizing you were never your roles to begin with.
So if you stop arguing with reality, and that whole structure that once gave you your identity loosens its grip, a really fascinating question emerges. If you're not the engineer, the mother, the provider, or the strong one, then what exactly are you? Well, you were never those roles. Actually, scratch that. They were just temporary masks. You are something vastly more profound than that. You are the silent awareness in which all of those roles appeared. When you were a little kid feeling the wind against your face, there was an awareness present. When your heart got broken in your 20s, that exact same awareness was there, holding the pain. When stress totally consumed your middle years, the awareness remained, quietly witnessing the storm. And as you were sitting here right now, listening to this, that exact same presence is still here. It hasn't aged a day. It has no wrinkles. It's the same silent witness just looking out through the different phases of your life, as though they were changing landscapes. This idea builds directly on those insights from depth psychology we talked about earlier. Carl Jung hit the nail on the head when he said, this surrender is the integration of the self, the dissolution of illusion, the acceptance of the psyche in its totality. Yielding to reality and recognizing this silent awareness inside you isn't some sort of defeat. It's actually an act of profound courage that leads you straight to unshakable peace. And philosopher Alan Watts echoed this beautifully too. He said, the illusion of separateness dissolves, and what remains is direct participation in life as it is. You see, you're not just an isolated entity trapped inside a body, struggling against some big, scary external universe. You are an expression of the exact same process that moves the wind and ignites the stars. The life that lives the universe is the exact same life that lives you, and when you truly recognize that, true loneliness loses its foundation entirely. You no longer feel like a random accident. You feel like a necessary, vital note in a massive symphony. Think about it this way. A tree doesn't have to justify its existence. A river doesn't have to earn its right to flow. They simply are. And in that exact same way, you are.
Aging isn't a mistake, and it's certainly not a decline. It's a beautiful transition where life finally releases its heavy demands on you. It's the moment you're finally allowed to just exist without needing a justification. The lines on your face, they're just evidence that you lived, you loved, and you endured. The silence in your days isn't some empty lack of something, it's the spaciousness to simply breathe without the constant deafening noise of trying to become someone else. You are enough, you are home, you really always have been.
So I want to leave you with this final lingering thought to chew on. Let go of the fight. Let go of that desperate need to be remembered, to be important in the eyes of everyone else, or to leave behind some grand proof that you are here. You honestly don't need proof. What if you just stopped fighting to be remembered and finally allowed yourself to just be here? Listen to the silence that's no longer empty. Feel the peace that absolutely doesn't depend on your circumstances. Life isn't asking anything more from you than your simple, profound presence. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope you take a moment today to just sit and simply be.